Well, we're back again with another lesson in our series on Unit 2, which is focusing on demand, supply, and pricing. For this lesson, we're going to get into the fundamentals of supply. In the previous lesson, we covered demand, so now it's our turn to basically take on the fundamentals of supply. You'll find that a lot of the things seem very similar, so if you had any issues with demand, they might be the same here with supply, but then again, if you found the material on demand to be quite easy, you'll probably find that the lesson on supply will be pretty easy as well. So let's get into our learning targets, what we're going to try and accomplish through this video. Alright, so we're going to define what supply is and determine what criteria must be met for it to exist. We're going to summarize the law of supply. We're going to interpret a supply schedule. We're going to differentiate between market and individual supply schedules and curves. As you can see, the learning targets are pretty much the same as they were for demand. The only thing I had to change for these is I swapped out the word demand and got supply in there. Let's get into it for the first one here. What is supply? Well, remember, we're going to be doing supply is going to be from the producer viewpoint. When we talked about demand, we were talking about it from a consumer viewpoint. So it's the amount of goods and services a producer is willing to provide at each price. Remember, demand was how much someone is willing to purchase at each price. And just like demand had, supply also has two criteria that has to be met. You have to have the ability to make it, and you have to have the desire to make it as well. Now, the word desire, that is something that shares with demand, but it's used a little differently, and we'll get into how that is right now. Let's do some evaluations here. Lamborghinis. I'm going to be the supplier in this particular case. Now, I have the desire. I want to make a Lamborghini. The problem is, I don't know how to make one. So it doesn't matter what price you are willing to sell it at, what price someone would be willing to buy it at, and what I'd be willing to sell it at. I can't make it, so therefore there's no supply. Well, let's take PlayStation 2. Is it, how many new PlayStation 2s do you see running around in stores? The only time you'll ever be able to find one brand new out of the box is if someone bought one a long time ago and just never opened it. Now, is it because Sony doesn't know how to make PlayStation 2s anymore? Did they just flat out forget? No, of course not, because how would you just forget? It's basically become where they don't have the desire to make it anymore. And the main reason for that is because the price that people are willing to pay for them has gone down so much that they don't find it worth their time and their resources to continue making them. That goes back to one of our old lessons in the first unit talking about scarcity, where we have to figure out as a producer, what can I make with my limited/scarce resources that's going to make me a lot of profit? Well, Sony finally came to the conclusion that it wasn't profitable or profitable enough for them to continue making PlayStation 2s. So they went ahead and they focused on making PlayStation 3s, and obviously right now they're making PlayStation 4s. There was actually a company not too long ago, I just read last school year, Funai was a company. You wouldn't think that people would still be making VCRs, but up until last year, there was a company still making VCRs. And the reason why is because up until that point, they still found that it was profitable enough for them to use what resources they had to make VCRs. So let's get into the law of supply right now. So law of supply is going to be a little bit different than what we had with the law of demand. With the law of demand, it was an indirect relationship, or inverse, excuse me. So it was opposite. As you can see here, it's a direct relationship. So as the price goes up, quantity is going to go up too, and it makes sense because the more expensive something becomes as a producer, the more willing I am to dedicate the resources I have to actually make that, because of course the higher the price, the more money I'm going to make off of it. And then, like we showed with our PlayStation 2 example, as the price goes down, the quantity goes down. Because I can't get as much money as I used to for those particular goods, I'm going to dedicate less resources to those things, because what's really going to happen is I'm going to find other things that I can make that's with my resources that will allow me to make a bigger profit. So now we're going to get into individual supply curves and individual schedules. So let's get into the first one with individual. So I'm going to be using this particular example for my individual supply curves and my schedules as well. Basically, when we look at an individual supply curve or an individual supply schedule, we're looking at how much, the quantity, How much is that one producer, just one, willing to make of a product to sell at each price? So when we look at the schedule that I'm going to put up there next, we're going to be using Spalding as our basketball maker. So I'm only looking at basketballs. So if I'm asking you, hey, what does this have to do with a supply schedule? You would say, all right, well, this is how many basketballs this one company, Spalding, is willing to make at each price. Let's take a look at it. So here, I just made up some fake numbers. I really don't know how accurate this would be. This is just for our example. But at $5, they're willing to make 100. And at 10, if they can sell it for $10, they're going to make 175. And then we can see when we get down to 35, our quantity has gone all the way up to 625. Now the nice thing is with this schedule is we can absolutely notice that the law of supply is being shown here. Because at $5, they're only willing to make 100. But at 35, as the price keeps going up, the quantity also goes up. So we can certainly see the law of supply being displayed here. And I took this same information and turned it into a curve. You won't find anything different from the curve that was on the schedule. So at 5, they were willing to make 100. You can see that here. And at 35, they were willing to make about 625. And of course, don't mind the S. That's just me labeling a supply curve. So I could ask you, looking at a schedule or a curve, and you can come up with the same answer. How many basketballs was Spalding willing to produce at $20? And you would just simply go up to price, and you would go here and say, oh, that's about 390. Or if I asked you, at what price is Spalding willing to make 300 basketballs? And you would find 300. Even though there's not a dot on there, we could still figure it out. So that would be about $16 or so. So this information, pretty easy to do. It's just simply reading a line graph. Let's get into the market version here. Market, how much the quantity that all producers are willing to make of a product to sell at each price. Now, Spalding isn't the only basketball manufacturer, and I only really chose the 6 that I could think of. There's obviously more companies than what you see here. I have Nike, Under Armour, Baden, Adidas, Wilson, and Rawlings. So those are all pretty popular basketball companies. So how much is each company, how much are all the companies willing to produce at $5, $10, $15, $20, and $35? So I came up with another kind of fake supply schedule. So these numbers aren't exactly real. It's just used for the purpose of our lesson. What you'll notice is that the quantities are much higher. And the reason why is because we're taking into account all of the producers within the market. So we can see that the quantities have jumped up. We're at 1,000. It used to be 100. It's at 1,750. It used to be only 175. Of course, you can probably see the pattern. All I did was add a 0 to each of the numbers previously. We can also see that the law of supply is going on here too, because as the price starts to increase, we also see that the quantities are increasing. And if we did the opposite, as the price starts to decrease, we see that the quantities are also decreasing. So we're almost done. Obviously, with the last one, we're going to go. We had a market supply. An individual supply scheduled and an individual curve. So now we're going to show a curve. This is that same information. So I should be able to tell the exact, answer the same type of questions. Even though there's not a dot on there to show something from our previous schedule, I could still ask the question: at what price would the market be willing to produce 5,000 basketballs? And all I'd have to do is take the quantity, which is always at the bottom, find that line, and write it all the way up. And at here, we'd see that it's about, we'll just go ahead and guess and say it's approximately $27. And you should be able to do that the opposite too. If I said, how many basketballs would the market produce if they offered it at $15? Well, I would just take $15 and I would go over here and I find it where it meets the line and I come down and I'd say that'd be around 2,800. And in the previous slide it showed 2,750. So that's close enough. With a graph like this, you don't have to have it exact. So no worries about that. That's going to wrap it up for us. We covered all the basics that are that you need to know as far as the fundamentals of supply, and we talked about individual and market supply. So let's make sure we can do these. If you can't do these, then just go back in the video and try and figure out exactly what it is that you missed out on. So can you define what supply is and tell me what 2 criteria must be met for it to exist? Can you summarize the law of supply, and can you interpret a supply schedule? And last thing, could you actually tell me what the difference is between a market and individual supply curve or schedule? That's going to wrap it up for now. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the factors that can impact demand. That'll be in our next video. Always a challenge each year, but once you get it, you'll realize it's a pretty simple concept. So we'll see you next time.